Hey, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to unlock some of the details about the Garmin Livescope so that you can better understand what you're seeing on the water and get more accuracy to your targets. All right, we're on the heels of the Bassmaster Classic. Just watched a great Bassmaster Classic. Shout out and congratulations to Jeff Gustafson, who won the Bassmaster Classic. And if anybody that tuned in and watched that or the previous event that Jeff was in the Elite Series with his win, saw him using his Garmin Livescope. He was moping, which is a certain kind of presentation, and drop a jig and a minnow bait down and hovered above, but it's very visual. And in the Elite Series, he did it very vertically, and in the Bassmaster Classic, he did it horizontally and vertically. So he cast it out and reeled it back. So he had to interpret his Garmin Livescope, and he had to know a lot about it. Even in most fishing situations that I've had with it, I did not know some of these details, and I think they will help you. So we'll jump into them. Some of the advanced things that we can do to see our jig better, and so that we can see the fish better, and so and that, for that matter, see the cover better. And one thing is we need to know about the angle of this transducer. And while it's 135 degrees, and let me explain a little bit about what I've got up on the screen, and I'm going to put it up in full screen here. You'll see up on the top here, you'll see the boat and you'll see the angle of it. And basically what I've got is in those distances, 5 feet, 10 feet, 20 feet, 40 feet, 80 feet, I just doubled it each time. I'm showing you the width of the actual beam that you see information in, right? So your return is made up of things in that beam at those distances. And so that's what this top representation is. And here I put a stump, right? And I put it off the center line. And we'll talk about that. And then on the bottom part of the image is the actual, your boat's positioned above the 135 here. That's a 135 degree angle that thing, the transducer beam is. And it goes behind the boat, as you can see. And then it goes out forward at 135 degrees. And you can see if the water level is the blue line, how the 135 degrees goes out from the unit itself and where it's positioned, right? So it's probably not positioned right at the surface. It's probably positioned 1.5 feet below the surface on your trolling motor. But anyways, we'll talk about that too. But that's the images you see here. So you see the 135 degrees. We'll say the boat's here. And we'll say that stump is out here in that neighborhood of 60 to 80 feet here. And the point that this picture is trying to make is that you don't necessarily, the stump is in the beam. So in the raw return over here on the right, you see the picture of the stump out there, but it isn't on the exact center line, right? So some people, if they cast their jig right on the center line and they don't see their jig or their lure fall down, they think that their settings are wrong or something's goofed up, when in reality, they're just, the stump happens to be offset to the right and they just didn't hit it. So you have to understand that when you're out 40 to 80 feet here, that you're going to be 14 to 28 feet of width. So knowing how far out you are and what the width of that beam is from the transducer is important, because you can maneuver back and forth until you get a solid reading on the stump to try to center it up if you can. But if you can't exactly center it up and you're having trouble seeing your bait, you can, change positions within that beam until you do see it. And a lot of times that little adjustment, casting it a little bit to the right of center, a little bit to the left of center, will bring all of a sudden your lure into view. And like I said, you can move the beam too to kind of center up on it where you get the strongest signal to try to lock it in the center. But knowing that these widths and these distances out are occurring will help you understand that you might not be in the center of your beam, and your lure might be dropping, off in a weaker signal area. As you get to the edges of this, it gets weaker. As you get to the center of it, it's obviously stronger. And the further away from the boat you are, the wider it is. So if you see a school of fish as you're scanning around out there 80, 100 feet, it can be 30 feet wide, the area that those fish are. And if they're schooling, it's not as big of a deal as it is when you're going after isolated fish. So that's the first thing I wanted to show, was this particular setup on how your position. And I will talk a little bit about some other settings to help you see your lure a little bit better. And again, I said this is 135-degree beam angle. There's the stump out there. And the blue is the surface of the water. And you'll notice I said before that there is some offsetting that needs to be done in the setup, and that's something I didn't know the first time around, that that we needed to go in and actually get the install depth right. And what that does is, you can see here on the upper right part of the screen, the beam angle, the 135 beam angle at about 5 to 10 feet is going right up off the screen. So what that's doing is that's aligning the top of my reading 10 feet from the boat right at the surface of the water. And how you do that is by getting, going through the menu system and getting your install depth right. And that install depth is the surface of the water to your actual transducer, right? Measure it. And usually, like mine, is probably going to be in the neighborhood of, 18 inches to 2 feet. But actually measure it from the surface of the water to the transducer, and then go in through your setup menu, go to sonar setup, go to installation, go to install depth, and then you'll get this screen here, and you can actually install the actual install depth. And I'm not sure what it comes at default, because in the default view, typically you can see that whole line, and you see line on the screen here, you see the line on the screen there. But I'm talking about this line right here, right? That line typically you can see. And when we do the install depth adjustment on it and get the right install depth on it, then the surface of the water is what's at the top of your screen, so that you're reading everything you're looking at. So now what'll happen is, if I make a cast out here at 25, 35 feet, I'll actually see maybe even the lure splash in the water here. I'll see some disturbance, and then I'll see my lure fall down. If you don't have that set up right, you don't see it until the lure actually gets in the sonar beam, and that's the line, right? So if your line is down further and you see room above it out to 20, 30, 40, 50 feet, you won't see your lure dropping until you get underneath that line, and that represents the view that the beam can actually see. So going in and getting your install depth right is another key way to be able to see your lure and to see the cover and the fish, and just to be on track from the time your bait hits the water till it gets down by the fish. So important concepts to know, important to know this particular setup. Maybe you've seen it around, but I've got a diagram here you can refer to so that you understand the width at the distances and where that cover might be to get your return. And you can swing your transducer back and forth until you get the strongest return on it, and that's typically center. But know that you can make adjustments with your cast either side of that center line, and you'll see your lure come into view. And then lastly, get the setting correct on your install depth, and you'll see your lure the second it hits the water. You'll see fish up near the surface. You'll have a better chance at catching your lure and seeing everything that's out in front of you better. So those tips and tricks, I think, will help. Certainly are going to help me, I think, get my setup dialed in a little bit better, so that I have the best chance to see my lure the very soonest in my cast, right? And targeting individual fish, and like in the case I talked about with Jeff Gustafson, he was absolutely targeting fish. He was targeting key elements of cover and structure where the fish would emerge out of. But to be that precise and to get your lure to fall down where you want it to fall, you need to be able to track it. You need to be able to understand the layout of that beam the best way possible. So there's a couple things that I thought would be useful for folks to know. I didn't know about the setup, setting it up in the right position so that I could see the surface of the water right from the beginning of my cast. I think that'll help me. And understanding that beam width certainly is going to help out. It certainly helped out Jeff Gustafson. These folks, these pros now are masters of what their electronics are giving them back as information. And as you get better with this stuff, you're able to better see what the fish are doing and how they're reacting in their environment, how they're reacting to your presentations, what the the conditions are doing to them. The better you understand how to use the equipment, the easier it is, I think, to solve the puzzle, right? And that's what we're all out there to do. So I hope this helps. Please like and subscribe. It certainly helps me out about halfway to my goal, and I appreciate the comments and the questions and all the fishing interaction. That's why we're here. So hope it helps, and we'll talk to you again soon.